Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, today we're talking all things Elon Musk. Is it genius or is it insanity? I don't know, but I think this conversation, it may be insanity that we're going to have this conversation, but we're going to do it today, man. We're talking all things Elon and change, and I think there's some things going on right now that are relevant to leaders. So I can't wait to dive in here to this fun conversation today.
Yeah, it's all over the news. I mean, even this morning, I saw, 6 more articles and posts and things on the news. I mean, it is getting crazy. I mean, you think about what's going on. They're trying to cut $2 trillion out of the budget. They've already pretty much done away with USAID. They went from 10,000 employees to 294. That's pretty radical. And I heard this morning they may go ahead and eliminate the other 294. Employees were sent emails 3 days ago that said, what did you do last week? Up to 5 bullet points. And if you fail to respond, we'll consider that a resignation. And that's just a partial list. I mean, it's hard to keep up with all of the crazy that's going on. It's just, it's insanity. At least it feels like insanity. That's what we want to debate here in just.
It may be some insanity for sure, but it may be some genius. I mean, I think the question is, because I have seen lots of things that taxpayer dollars have been going toward that have been cut out of this thing, and the efficiency side of Doge. I mean, I like the idea of having a department of efficiency. I guess if you need one, I also like a department of effectiveness. Nobody's talking about that, so. I love this idea of making sure things are right. And by the way, I was having a conversation just a couple of days ago with a leader who said, how many CEOs, business owners, company owners are sitting there looking at what they're doing and asking themselves, are we being efficient? Where's our waste and all this kind of thing? So I think this larger conversation is taking place. A lot of it, this has been a catalyst for that, which I think is cool. But Mark, as we look back,
and let me say, as far as being a catalyst, I think our hope is that today will be a catalyst, because we're probably not going to land on whether it's genius or insanity. There's probably some of both in there. But what we are going to talk about today is that when you lead change, you need to do it well. And we're going to give you some very practical things that you can do to ensure that the chaos is minimized. I won't say we can eliminate it, because there's a large percentage of the population that just doesn't like change. And as leaders, we have to understand that, but we have to manage that tension.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Mark. I hope the people listening today will give some thought to what's going on in their world. And you and I mean, we've been around for a while. We have seen so many changes. We've led so many changes. We've been a part of so many changes for decades. And there's some things about change that are great. If the change is right, it's really great. But there's always things about change that are hard. We'll talk about some of that today. And I think the tension is, how do I, as a leader, lead change but not upset the stability of what we're trying to do? I think, as we look at what's going on right now with Doge, I mean, it feels like to me the plates are shifting and there's a lot going on. I think you can almost have too much too fast, and so all that stuff. And I'm sure people are thinking about that, or maybe they're not. I don't know, but I think if the leaders listening here and they start making radical change, you gotta give some thought to how's it, how do we communicate it? Who does it affect? Who do we talk to first? All that kind of stuff. So I can't wait to dive in on some of this.
Well, let me add something to this, and many in the audience may already know this. This is actually not unprecedented. During the Clinton administration, he reduced the federal workforce by 377,000 people. That's more than Trump and Elon are trying to do.
Right. So this is not just a Republican thing. This is both. I mean, they're
both, but here's the thing. I don't remember any of the turmoil and chaos, and maybe I just don't remember it. So I've been asking myself, what's different if in essence Clinton was able to reduce the workforce by twice what Musk and Trump are trying to do without the apparent side effects. What's different? And I'll come
Well,
up with
maybe,
a couple.
maybe,
Well,
well, I was going to say, maybe having the richest man in the world as a part of the thing. I mean, that's a big part of it, probably.
yeah.
But
I think the person, right? The person matters a lot. I think the pace matters.
Yeah.
Clinton, and I'm not saying right or wrong, but as I've looked at the differences, Clinton did his workforce reduction over 8 years. And so far, we're 8 weeks in?
8 minutes in.
377,000 people haven't lost their job yet. But nonetheless, I think the pace, and then third, I would say the process has been very different. Many of the cuts that were initiated by Clinton, he went through Congress. And of course, these are happening through executive order, and some have even said extra judicial process where Musk and his team are making some of these decisions, which he continues to deny. But the point is, I think there are some differences. But what's not different is that great leaders understand change is not extracurricular. Change is not optional. That even when you and I have worked on the serve model, as Chick-fil-A calls it, where we were trying to figure out what are those core and essential fundamentals that all of the best leaders throughout history have embraced, right at the heart of our model is reinvent continuously. That's what's not up for debate. A lot of questions about how you do it and timing and who does it and what's the process. But our job as leaders is fundamentally to create and sustain positive change in service of the mission or the vision. And so I think that's one thing that you might find Trump and Clinton agreeing on, even though their methods have been wildly different.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the media is another wild card in this. They're the messages that they're putting out, but there's so much that's going on that is back to what you're saying there. There's so much that's going on that is it feels in some ways just like a lot of change. I mean, again, the plates are shifting, but I like the idea of going back to the vision and the mission that you just said there. To me, it is about effectiveness as much as anything. And if we're inefficient, we're not going to be as effective as we can be. But I want us to make sure if we're listening, we're thinking about that vision that we have and that mission that we have. And are we leading change for change's sake? Are we really trying to change things to take us to a better place? And I've said for a while, I've said it actually on here before, that different is not always better. We can do things really well, and if we're doing things the right way and with the right vision and mission behind it or toward that, I think we need to double down on that and keep doing what we do. I mean, it's just there's no question. But better is always going to be different. If we want something better, if there are gaps between what we say we want, what we aspire to in our culture, and what our reality is, that's when change needs to take place. And that, you've said for a long time, that is the role of the leader, to initiate and lead positive change. We're even little preview, maybe it might be a few year preview here, but we've even done work on the change idea, because there's just not a lot out there on how to lead change well. So I'm excited about that project down the road. But I would say today we can at least give people some things to think about. If they're leading change even in a disruptive way, you can do the right thing, but you got to do it in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me summarize at least the way I would encapsulate what you just said is progress is always preceded by change. Progress is always preceded by change. And so it's something that leaders need to run towards, not run from. You just need to do it well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's do a couple things here. I'd like to. There's a way that we've thought about this historically. We won't maybe unpack it a lot, but let's say a word about if we're going to reinvent, there are different domains, we call them, that you can reinvent. Let's think about the leader who's listening today. I think you and I both would say, if you're going to start somewhere, look in the mirror and what do you need to do to reinvent you? And some people right now are stuck in their organizations, maybe in their relationships, in their teams. It's a me problem, right? I may be the issue. I may be the bottleneck of what's going on. And so a lot of ways, a lot of things we can do to reinvent ourselves, but I don't want to miss the reminder that a lot of times it starts by looking in the mirror.
Yeah. And the question that I would encourage our listeners to ask is, what is it like being led by you?
Yeah, I love that.
And
that.
Perhaps there's some things that you need to reconsider. There may be some things you need to change, some things that you need to reinvent about yourself. And let me quickly say, this doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad leader. I would argue the better leader you are, the more you want to continuously reinvent yourself, always upskilling, always learning, always growing for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which is you don't have the moral authority to challenge others to grow if you're not showing them the way.
That's really good. All right, Mark, there's a second domain you've talked about for years, and we've both said for years that systems actually are in place. Some people hate systems, but systems are actually in place to make excellence repeatable. Will you say a word about that leader out there who's listening who may need to reinvent some systems because there's some things that are not happening because they don't have the systems? What would you say to that leader?
Well, just to bring additional clarity to that term, when we say systems, we're actually talking about the work process. What are the things that you do in order to achieve or to attempt to achieve the outcome that you want? And so when you think about reinventing systems, I think you start with, are we getting the outcomes we want? Now, you may say yes. Well, congratulations. Your system is in control, which is an engineering manufacturing term, right? You've got a predictable outcome. But if you want a different outcome, hope is not a strategy. If you want a different outcome, you're going to have to either change the input or the system. You change the input or the system. And so if you want to improve profitability, then the question is, what are you willing to change? If you want to improve sales, what are you willing to change? If you want to improve employee retention or engagement or your execution, what are you willing to change? Because the systems, the processes, the beliefs, and the behaviors that you have in place today are perfectly aligned for the outcomes that you're now receiving. And so when you're thinking, are there things in my area of influence that need to be reinvented? As Randy said, start with yourself. But the next place you need to look is, where do we need different outcomes? You probably have an opportunity for reinvention.
Yeah. So if you're listening, maybe one system that you would start with, maybe lots of things from employee onboarding all the way to, reorientation, not just orient them on the front side, but like who needs a reminder kind of thing, and all things in between with work processes. I love that. So great. All right. So our third domain we talk about all the time, Mark, is the idea of how important it is to have the right structure around us. And we've had some big dog leaders from different companies who have talked about the importance of your structure. We had one leader I remember who's scaled some of the most incredible companies on the planet, who said you're really, what you're trying to do is most important, but who's going to help you, and do you have the right structure around you to accomplish what you're trying to do? Because most of us listening are trying to do something that's bigger than what we can do on our own. We had another leader talk to us about, if you have issues with performance or high performance, if you want to think about it that way, oftentimes it's a structure issue. It's not a vision issue. Maybe it's not even a system. It could literally be your structure will not support what's going on. And everyone listening, we've only got so much capacity, but while we can't get more time, there's no more time available to any of us. There are different structures, and we actually are able to multiply time when we have a better structure. So I would say if you're going to reinvent, you may need to look at your structure. Mark, you may have other thoughts on that as well.
Well, just two things I'll add to that. Structure by design should enable, not inhibit performance. So if you find it really challenging to accomplish the things you're needing to accomplish, if you feel like you're having to overinvest energy, resources, communication, and it's just really, really hard, that could be a clue that you've got a structural problem. And if things are falling through the cracks, just you're missing things and you're not executing the way that you want to execute. Those are both clues that you may need to reinvent the structure. Last thing I'll say about that, I've met so many leaders that feel like they're a victim of the structure. So I want to acknowledge that many of you do not control structure. I got it. I understand. I've been in that chair. But if you believe structure is the impediment to higher levels of performance, then I would encourage you to go about influencing those who make those structural decisions. Don't just put it in the too hard pile, because you're going to be frustrated. Your people are going to be frustrated, and your results are going to be less than they could be. But if you do have the authority to change structure, don't shy away from it. Sometimes that's the missing ingredient.
Great reminder, Mark. That's really good. Okay, so at the beginning, we talked about managing this tension. When lots of change or reinventing starts taking place, we want to talk about managing the tension. And notice I didn't say eliminate the tension. I think there's always going to be tension, Mark, but I think there's some things that we can do to manage it. I don't even know that we'll reduce it. It's going to be there. It's going to feel heavy. It's the mantle of leadership is always going to be, it's going to be heavy. And so are there some things that we can do to manage that tension? We want to give you a few things to think about that if you're listening. And Mark, I think you would say we would start with vision, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leadership needs to help people understand why you're reinventing, why you're doing the change that you're attempting to do. And you might argue that Trump and Musk did this sort of when they said they're trying to cut $2 trillion. Well, I'm out of the U.S. annual budget, and I'm not saying that's not vision, but I would say it needs a lot more color. It needs a lot more commentary. I mean, there are many instances when a singular goal can provide the vision, but people unpack it and they explain it. Leaders, that is, they unpack it and they explain it and they help people rally around it. I just think you really do need to start with the vision.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, Mark, we can get into a situation where we know something needs to change, and by dog, we're going to change it, but we're not even really sure exactly the vision ourselves. I mean, maybe we are, but maybe it's kind of, and you can't kind of go toward a vision. You have to be crystallized on what it is you're really trying to do if you're going to reach your potential. And we say all the time, I've said this for the last couple of years, I've been reminding leaders, if the vision is fuzzy to you, just even a little bit fuzzy to you, it'll be blurry to the people who are following you. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity that is the residue of a lack of vision. When a leader doesn't have it crystallized, him or herself, I think it's really important to dial that in, high def before we start just doing stuff, because if we don't understand why, people won't understand why. And I think that's the second thing. It's not just to start with the vision, but to understand why and to be able to explain why to people. This, even at a strategic level, what is the strategy we're going to take here to get toward the vision that we talked about? And I think that is, I think so many leaders underutilize this thought here. We need to explain the why. We need to make sure people know why we're doing what we're trying to do, because I think people are not against change as much as they are against vagary, or not like, why are you doing it?
Let me back up half a step, and I agree with you in principle, and I agree with you in essence, but sometimes the vision is not crystal clear. And so I've always encouraged leaders to talk about intentions and aspirations. And where there is not clarity, or let me say it this way, where there is not certainty, don't provide it. You can provide clarity of intent, but you may not be able to provide certainty around outcomes or even methods. I've been challenged before as a leader about how are we going to accomplish this or that. And I remember one specific instance when I said, I have no idea. We're going to figure that out. But here's the aspiration. Here's the intention. And we're going to be really clear on that. And the certainty will come over time. Now, I want to pick up with what you just said, though. I think the why is absolutely critical. So throw in a quick historical example. When President Kennedy said we're going to put men on the moon and return them safely to Earth before the end of the decade. So you might argue, some have said that was the mission, but in the context of this conversation, everybody knew what needed to happen. But he did so much more than that. He told them why. He said, we need to or I don't think he said reestablish, but in essence, it was reestablish our superiority in space exploration. What a lot of folks don't remember or don't know is we were already 5 years behind the Soviets. They launched Sputnik in 1957. We didn't even form NASA until 1958. They were leading the space race. So there was a reason. Another reason is that the president stated, is that we would learn and grow as a nation by doing hard things. In fact, he said, we're not doing it because it's easy. We're doing it because it's hard. And he understood the rigor and the value of that rigor that we would place on our nation. And then the third thing he said is we are going to learn about the exploration of space, which is going to be good for all mankind. And he said more, but he didn't just say we're going to the moon. He said, here's why. And I think that's something, if I were coaching Trump and Musk, which I don't have that opportunity, I would say I don't hear them talking enough about the why. I mean, I know that Trump, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to that point, and again, I wouldn't say we're endorsing these guys at all, but let me read a couple of statistics here. And I think if we were talking about this might help a little bit. So here's a couple of things. The current levels of government spending are going to bankrupt Medicare in the next 5 years if we don't do something. So that would be helpful if the media were talking about that. Social Security's trust fund, there's a statistic, it will run out of funds by 2035. I don't think anybody wants that.
Some are saying sooner. Some are thinking it's not going to make it to 2035.
And the federal deficit annually is approaching $2 trillion. And so I think we all get debt and what it does to us and how it enslaves us. The debt is now $36 trillion. So something,
I was going to say 36 trillion.
We can't continue doing what we're doing and expect it not to lead to a bad place if we're not doing the right thing. So I always told my kids when I was growing up, the longer you stay on the wrong road, the further you get from where you want to be. But the closer you get to disaster too, if you're really on the wrong road. So but that's not been explained to me. I've not heard anybody talking about that. I mean, it's just like you and I ran across these stats, but why is the media not saying, here's what we're trying to do, and here's why? And again, I'm not endorsing anybody, but I think just if you don't explain something and you just start changing a bunch of stuff, it actually undermines your credibility as a leader, I think. Agree?
Right. And so a message to those of you out there who are leading change in your organization or on your team, share as much as you can about the why. And I think it'll help mitigate and minimize the chaos. It won't eliminate the tension that Randy already mentioned, but the why really does matter.
Yeah. And so if you're cutting something out or changing something or doing something different, let me remind you also that you got to allow people to, what would we say, mourn the loss almost. I always say you want to give people a chance to grieve what we leave. Meaning if you start cutting programs or eliminating jobs, well, that's somebody's teammate or that's somebody's, partner in what you're trying to do. or the way we did that was my great idea 3 years ago, and now you're just going to do away with it. And all of a sudden, I'm not against let's get better, but if you don't appreciate the fact that people are emotionally and time, energy, effort, I mean, they're invested here in the way you are doing things now, probably. And the more that's true, the more you've got to give people a chance to grieve that loss. And so I don't want to, I mean, it's great to change stuff, but if you don't understand that this is going to affect people, it's easy to sit in my office and say, let's do this. And I don't think about what's going to happen at the front line of the organization, or the mid-level manager, or, the bullpen, if I'm a baseball coach, whatever. It's a change in one place often affects people in different ways. And there'll be people, we know a company right now, one of the companies we're working with, they're just doing great. It's incredible what they've accomplished. And I was having a conversation with them a few weeks ago. They're moving their location about 3 miles down the road, new offices. It's going to be fantastic. Mark, you've experienced this before, but there are going to be people, we've already talked about this a little bit. There are people in that organization that I don't want to move. That's the cubicle where I got my first promotion, or that's the place where and we got to respect that people feel that stuff. And if we just understand that, and we can help them through the emotion of change, oftentimes we get to a better place, and we're really glad we're there. But if we just ramrod, this is what we're doing, we can lose people along the way. And that's not the goal.
Sure. And I'll add one thing to what you said about cutting programs and people having an attachment to those, a personal and emotional attachment. If you have a high percentage of people who have responsibility in their top strengths, they have a very, very hard time separating their identity from their work. And so in those cases specifically, when you eliminate a program, they're going to interpret that as a personal attack on their self-worth. Now, you may not be able to prevent that, but you can address that, and you can speak to that, and you can try to help them untangle the fact that this is a project that helped us pursue a goal, or it was a strategy that's no longer as helpful as it used to be, or we've got a higher and better use of your time, but this is not about you. And so just know, if you've got a lot of those people, and I've worked with a lot of those people, you just have a little bit of a different approach in helping them mourn the loss.
Yeah, that's so true. And Mark, when we were preparing and talking about this, one of the things that you reminded me was, no matter how well we do this, there's still going to be some people that, like, I'm just not on board. Can you speak to that for a second? Just remind the leader there.
Yeah. It's just an unfortunate byproduct of change. And the research actually came out of the 60s. A guy named E.M. Rogers first began to study how people respond to innovation, and his findings have now been generalized and validated or revalidated over the last several decades, that the way people respond to innovation is the same way people respond to change. And we won't get into all of that today, but you can imagine there's a small percentage, I think it's about 7%, they're going to be at the front end of the line. They want the change, doesn't matter what it is, they love change. And then on the far back side of the curve, it's a bell curve, as you might imagine, there's about 16% of people, which, you think about it, that's actually a lot of people. Rogers called them the laggards. And they are not going to adopt or embrace what you're working on. And so, again, you want to honor those people as much as possible. It doesn't mean they can't work for you, but I've always encouraged leaders, don't overinvest trying to win the hearts and minds of that 16%, because the data now for decades is going to say that they're not going to get excited about your new idea, your new program, your new structure, your new office building down the street. That's just the way humans tend to be wired when you put them in a large group. Some people are going to be laggards.
It'd be good if we would spend our time on the 75% in the middle, making sure we move them to that, healthy change place. So One thing I want to just remind people as well is when we change, when we pick something up, it's almost like if I pick an object up, I've only got two hands, and so I'm going to have to lay something down when I pick something up. I think there's just a good reminder there. I remember years ago, Mark, you actually were debating blogging. You remember this? You were like, I'm going to start blogging, and we were having a conversation. I'd been blogging for a while actually, and I probably was the right person to ask because I've been doing it for a few years, and I was just neck deep in knowing that if you start this, it's going to every single day. It comes like the tide, I think was what I told you. What are you going to stop doing? That was my question to you. What are you going to stop doing? And it was about that time that we ran across a book, I think is a good reminder for leaders here. That book actually helped probably both of us think about the importance of saying no to some stuff if we're going to say yes to some stuff. Let's land today with that book reminder. I know you've got a copy there of Henry's book. Will you share just a word about that and encourage people with that?
Sure. Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book. He's written a lot of books, which I've read several of them, but this is one of the best books I've ever read. It's called Necessary Endings. Now, when I say it's one of the best books I've ever read, I think I would say two things for me make a great book. One is content and the other is context. And so the content is rock solid, but let me tell you why this spoke to me from a context standpoint. Is I have always struggled with necessary endings. And so Henry's premise, I'll try to do it justice here really, really succinctly, is, and I know Henry, he's explained this to me one-on-one because he wanted to be sure I got it, but he explains it in detail in the book, is he believed that what differentiates the very best leaders on the planet from all the other leaders is their willingness and ability to embrace the concept of necessary endings. And you think about, really? You think about all the things. He said, yeah, well, the best leaders need all the things. But if you lined up all the best leaders and look for the top 0.1%, they can make the hard decisions regarding necessary endings. And he said, a lot of leaders struggle. And so as a leader who struggled with that, I found this book extremely helpful. And he opens with a metaphor. So I won't do a spoiler alert, but I will set up the premise of the entire book. And he talks about the master gardener. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a rose bush that was not pruned. I have one at my house. And Henry said they all have one thing in common. They're ugly. And they look they look awful, and they don't produce a lot of beautiful flowers. He said, but the master gardener prunes, and he said he prunes three things. He or she prunes the good buds that aren't great. And he said the great leader will prune good things that aren't great. He said, well, why wouldn't you keep all of the good stuff? Well, the gardener knows that the bush can produce more buds than it can actually sustain. They will not all flourish if you've got too many. So the gardener, like the leader, is making some choices. Which of these things do we think have the greatest potential? The others, the gardener will prune. The second thing the master gardener prunes are those that are sick that will not recover. Now, there's judgment and discernment required here, but for a leader, when you see a program that's struggling, you've got to make a judgment. Is this something we can salvage? Can it become great? Or is this going to be a slow curve to worthlessness? Well, the smart leader, the wise leader, will prune those things as well. And third and finally, Henry said, the master gardener prunes those branches that are already dead. Well, how's that apply to me and you? There's a lot of stuff in many organizations that are already dead, and meaning they're not adding value, but people are still going through the motions. The wise leader and the wise gardener are going to prune those things as well. And when you and I develop that mindset and that lens on the world around us, and then muster the courage to do that type of pruning when needed, the things that remain have the greatest odds of flourishing. And this book is all about how to learn to do that. And so I think I distributed about 3,000 copies of this after I came across it. So maybe you'll go out today and get your copy.
Yeah, I would echo what Mark said. Necessary Endings. I'd put it in my maybe top 5 books of all time, and I read a lot of books. I mean, it's that good. It was great. And I think one of the things that will really resonate with anybody that's listening to this conversation, if they pick that book up, is that we all have a tendency to try to do maybe more than we should and that we can. I mean, there's in the rose bush, there's only so many nutrients to, for those buds. And so if you're listening today and you're having a capacity squeeze on your leadership, if you're wanting to go down this road of change, so many good things there in that book I would encourage. Let me just give you a couple of final thoughts here. Again, thanks for listening. I hope this conversation has given you some ideas and some things, but let's close it with this. As you look at your leadership right now, it will be tempting to think that this change conversation is just some extracurricular thing. Change is not extracurricular for leaders. It's the job. Honestly, it's what you do. You take things as they are and you take them to a better place. That's what we're about. And so I would say, again, start with you. Is there one area in your leadership right now, maybe even in your life, that needs to change? Let's ask it this way. What do you want to be different a year from now? What do you want to be true in a year that's not true today, or 6 months, or the next 90 days, a quarter? But you back it up however you want to. Secondly, is there a system right now that is missing? It's keeping you from making excellence repeatable. And then Mark's talking about structure a moment ago. Are there places in your structure you don't have built around you, something that's going to sustain the weight of what it is that you've got going on? I want to encourage you to look at self-systems and structure. And then maybe we'll just close with Mark's final charge there on necessary endings. Is there something right now that you're going to need to let go of? A relationship, a way of doing things, a thought pattern, a lot of things there, something that needs to end. If you're going to pick something else up, you're going to have to lay something down. And I want to encourage you today to make this highly actionable. This is not just something we wanted to talk about Doge and Elon Musk. We want you to think through what it is you're trying to do and what needs to change. The best leaders really do reinvent continuously, and they are understanding of this concept. So I think it's a never-ending process. Mark, you may have a final word. I'm not sure if you got another thought here, but I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Keep leading.
Keep leading. I love that. That's good. I hope you'll share with your friends and family. Hit the like button if you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel or any of that stuff. All this stuff is available there. Know a lot of teams that are actually showing this stuff in their meeting and having some conversations over it. However we can serve you, let us know. You can reach out to info@leadeveryday.com. We'll be back with you next week for all new content. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.